My name is Ella, and my life has revolved around my dad ever since my mom passed away. I was only 4 years old when it happened, but the memory of my mother still looms large in my mind, like a beautiful but distant dream. Mom is always gentle, with a warm smile that I feel can dispel all sadness. After my mother passed away, everything in my life seemed to change completely. Dad and I moved into my grandparents' house, a spacious house that always felt empty, like Mom's loss had left a void that couldn't be filled. At first, my dad didn't date anyone. He focused entirely on raising me, trying to make up for my mother's absence. I still remember that he often took me to the park near our house in the afternoons after work, where we played on the swings or simply sat on the bench and talked about small things of the day. Those moments made me feel safe, like as long as I had my dad, everything would be okay. However, I knew that he also suffered a lot in his heart, even though he never showed it in front of me. When I was 12 years old, my dad started trying to date. Those were just short coffee or dinner sessions with a few women he met through introductions from friends. But none of them entered our house, and Dad didn't seem really attached to anyone. I can feel that he still loves his mother very much and is not ready to move on. During those years, I didn't fully understand, but looking back now, I know my father was trying to find the happiness he had lost, even if only for a moment. Things started to change when I was 14 years old. Both of my grandparents have passed away, leaving behind a large house with only me and my father. That was the time when I felt my father's loneliness most clearly. He often sat in the living room, looking distantly out the window, as if waiting for something or someone. That's when Clara entered our lives. One evening, my father came home with a strange smile, both nervous and excited. "Ella, I want you to meet someone special," he said, his voice shaking slightly. That was the first time I saw my father like that. And then Clara appeared, elegant, confident, with golden hair and a perfect smile. But what really caught my attention were the two people standing behind her, Ethan and Sophie. That's when I knew my life would never be the same again. It didn't take long for Clara to make her mark in our lives. After just a few months of dating, she and her two stepchildren, Ethan and Sophie, moved in with us. It's strange how a house that once felt spacious now feels cramped, not because of the space, but because of the atmosphere. Ethan took over the living room, turning it into a place to play games and keep his electronic devices. Sophie, on the other hand, monopolized her grandparents' office that my father had to convert into a bedroom for her. Clara, with her elegant appearance, brought with her a series of personal belongings, quickly filling every corner of the house with things that did not belong to my family. The biggest change comes from sharing space. I'm used to having the bathroom almost all to myself. But now, every morning is a race. Clara spent hours on her beauty routine. Sophie spent time taking selfies to post on social networks. And Ethan didn't even bother to clean up after use. I had to wake up an hour earlier just so I could shower and get ready for school. Not only is it annoying, but it also makes me feel like I no longer have a place in my own home. Even so, I still tried to endure for my father. He looked very happy. This is the first time since my mother passed away that I have seen him so radiant. He started taking the time to cook dinner, returned home on time, and even smiled every time Clara walked into the room. I don't want to break that. I told myself that if this made Dad happy, I could endure this small inconvenience. But the problem doesn't stop there. One day, my father announced that he had just been promoted to regional sales manager. That's good news, but it comes with a worrying reality. He will have to frequently travel on business, sometimes for months at a time. As soon as he left, Clara began to change. The sweet, gentle woman I once saw suddenly disappeared, replaced by a strict and imposing manager. "Ella," she said in a commanding voice, "we need to establish some new rules. This house needs to run smoothly when your father is not here." Those rules are not simply ordinary instructions. They were a long list of chores that I had to do, while Ethan and Sophie didn't have to do anything. I had to clean, cook, and couldn't participate in any after-school activities. When I mentioned that I had volleyball practice on Thursday, Clara simply responded coldly, "Then you should give up. Family is more important." Things got worse when she pretended to play the role of heroine, every time my father called. "Things are hard when you're not here, but I'm trying my best," she said, sighing as if she were the only one keeping this house from collapsing. Meanwhile, I stood in the corner of the room, my hands red from dishwashing liquid, trying to suppress my anger. Ella needs to set clear boundaries. In American culture, standing up for personal rights is very important. Ella should have a frank talk with her father about how Clara treated her while he was away. At the same time, she needs to take notes or collect evidence of these unfair acts so that her father can have a clearer view. Silence will only make things worse, and Ella deserves to live in a fair environment, especially in her own home. The injustice in the house becomes increasingly unbearable as Dad continues to travel on business. Clara quickly took advantage of the opportunity to control every aspect of my life. Every day after school, I rush home to start the housework assigned by Clara. The tasks seem to never end: mopping the floors, doing the laundry, cooking dinner, cleaning the kitchen. And while I toiled away, Ethan was glued to the screen, and Sophie sat for hours on her phone, giggling with friends over FaceTime. One day, I was too tired to keep quiet. While I was scrubbing the sink, soapy water splashing all over my hands, Sophie sat nearby, painting her nails as if nothing mattered. I turned to Clara, who was sitting on the sofa reading a fashion magazine, and asked, "Why do I have to do all this?" Sophie and Ethan never help at all. Clara looked up and smiled coldly. "Ethan needs to focus on finding a job, and Sophie needs to prepare for college. And you," she said, her voice stern, "are someone who knows how to sacrifice for the family." I couldn't believe my ears. Why isn't it considered important that I go to school, do my homework, and prepare for the future? I feel angry, but don't know what to do. In American culture, speaking up for justice is necessary, but I fear that if I speak further, I will be punished more severely, or worse, pushed out of the house. When my dad called, I tried to mention what was going on, but Clara always interrupted the conversation. She began to complain about her difficulties, saying that Ella is learning to grow up, but sometimes she needs a little reminder. Those words not only distorted the truth, but also made me feel like I was being strangled in my own home. The climax was one evening when my father had just returned from a long business trip. Clara organized a sumptuous dinner to welcome him, but instead of spending time with the family, she only focused on showing off the new handbag her father bought for her. I sat there, silent, watching my father smile happily at Clara, completely unaware of the discontent boiling inside me. I wanted to tell everything, wanted Dad to know that I was being taken advantage of, that the presence of Clara and her children had turned my life into an endless struggle. But then I remembered my father, for the first time in many years, truly happy. I didn't want to break that, and so I kept quiet again. Clean up in silence, endure in silence, and silently swallow all the bitterness in your heart. I told myself that if I just waited until I graduated, I could leave here and start my own life. But deep inside, I knew that I shouldn't let people like Clara and her children control my life. This is not only a personal issue, but also a matter of self-esteem and the right to be respected. I thought things couldn't get worse, but then that dinner happened. A week after her father left on a new business trip, Clara gathered the family around the dinner table. The air was heavy as she put down her knife and fork and looked up with a serious expression I had rarely seen. "Ella?" she began, her voice so sweet it made me shiver. "Since you're an adult and turning 18, we need to have a serious talk about responsibility." I looked up, an uneasy feeling starting to ripple in my heart. Sophie and Ethan were sitting next to them, both smiling mysteriously, as if they knew what was about to happen. "Starting next month," Clara continued, her voice colder, "you will need to contribute to the family expenses. It's a small amount, $500 per month. This is very fair and helps children learn to be responsible." I couldn't believe what I just heard. This house originally belonged to my mother's family, and Clara, who had just moved here a few years ago, was now asking me to pay to live in her own house. I tried to stay calm, even though my insides were boiling. "But why do I have to pay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Ethan doesn't. Sophie doesn't either. They didn't do anything." Clara immediately shot me a sharp look. "James is looking for a job. And Sophie needs to focus on her studies, she replied, as if it were the most obvious reason in the world. And you're old enough to learn how to be independent. Anger welled up inside me, but I knew I had to control it. In American culture, it is important to stay calm and speak clearly in such stressful situations. Okay, I said, my voice quiet but firm. In that case, I'll need to make one thing clear. This house belongs to me. Clara froze, and Sophie and Ethan burst out laughing, clearly thinking I was joking. Tell me again, Clara rasped, her eyes shining with disbelief. I emphasized each word. This house belongs to you. The maternal grandparents transferred ownership to their children before they passed away. Dad confirmed it. The air in the room became so heavy that it could be cut with a knife. Clara angrily picked up the phone to call her father. When Dad answered, his voice was filled with worry. David, Clara shouted, Ella is making up stories that this house belongs to her, right? The silence stretched on the other end of the line like a confession. Finally, Dad answered, his voice filled with hesitation. Yes, Clara, the house does belong to Ella. Clara hung up with a look of disbelief on her face. She turned to me, trying to force a smile, but the anger was still clear in her eyes. This is definitely a misunderstanding. We'll discuss this later, she said, her voice trying to be soothing. But I know things have changed forever. After that tense conversation, Clara seemed determined to turn my life into a nightmare. She stopped trying to hide her contempt for me, and Sophie and Ethan quickly followed suit, as if everything were a game. The next morning, Clara announced that since I owned the house, I would also be responsible for all maintenance work. Things like mowing the lawn, cleaning the house, and making minor repairs are all the homeowner's responsibility, she said, her voice cold and full of sarcasm. I knew this was nothing more than a way for Clara to punish me for speaking up in my defense. But I don't back down. I spent the afternoon cleaning, while Sophie and Ethan sat on the sofa, laughing and throwing trash right where I had cleaned it. It's not just injustice, it was an intentional humiliation of me in my own home. Everything came to a climax one Saturday morning. I woke up to find Clara standing in the kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, her voice sweeter than usual. Yes, I'm looking at some apartments for rent, she said, glancing coldly at me. We could move, but I need to make sure it's good enough for Sophie and Ethan. When I entered the room, she immediately changed her tone. Ella, honey, why don't you make me a cup of coffee? I'm feeling a little tired. I silently looked at her, feeling the deliberate provocation in every word. But this time, I did not stay silent. If you are not satisfied with this house, then I fully support you finding a new place to live, I replied, my voice calm but firm. Clara's face darkened. Who do you think you are? She shouted, her voice echoing throughout the house. We are your family. You can't send us away like strangers. I took a deep breath. Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me, I said, looking straight at her. I'm not kicking you out. I just want the people who live here to respect each other. And that starts with you and your children contributing your fair share. Clara turned to Sophie and Ethan, her voice still filled with anger. Go pack your things. If she wants us to pay, then we'll leave. The children didn't say a word, just reluctantly followed. As they left the house, Clara shot me a hateful look. You will regret doing this, she threatened before slamming the door. Comments and advice. Ella courageously and steadfastly defended her rights, which is worthy of support in American culture, where property rights and fairness are valued. However, you should prepare for further reactions from Clara and her family. An important step is to work with a lawyer to ensure all legal procedures are correct, preventing any problems that may arise. At the same time, Ella should focus on her future, investing in her education and a new life where she can find true peace and happiness. After Clara and her children left, the house suddenly became unusually quiet. At first, I felt relieved, but then the emptiness began to creep in. This is my house, but it never really felt like mine since Clara moved in. With them gone, I decided that it was time to reclaim this space and turn it into the home I always wanted. I spent the next week cleaning and rearranging everything. Every corner of the house is filled with my mother's memories, from old family photos to the armchair she used to sit on. I carefully cleaned each photo frame, placing them back in their original positions, as if to restore some of the memories that Clara had tried to erase. It is not just a physical action, but also a mental step. For the first time in many years, I felt like my house was starting to reflect me. However, Clara did not let things stop that easily. Less than a week after they moved out, I received a series of text messages from my dad. "Clara is very upset because of the way you treated her and her children," he wrote. "You must learn to forgive and accept. Family is everything." Each line is like a knife cutting into my heart. How can you not see the injustice I have endured? How could he put Clara's feelings above his own daughter's feelings of betrayal? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat down and wrote a long letter to him. I talked about everything I had endured over the years, the discrimination, the injustice, the times I was considered an outsider in my own home. "Dad," I wrote, "I love you and always want to see you happy, but your happiness cannot be built on my suffering. I cannot continue to live in an environment where I am viewed like an invisible person." I sent the letter, not knowing if he would read it or not, but feeling relieved to finally be able to say everything. The following days, I focused on myself. I received a college admission notice in another state and decided this was my chance to start over. I started planning, getting everything organized, and felt hope for the first time in a long time. Dad didn't reply to my letter. Clara also did not contact back. I don't know if that means they have given up or are simply waiting for a chance to counterattack. But I know that I was right to stand up for myself. In American culture, independence and protecting personal rights are important. This is my time to focus on the future, building a life I can be proud of, a life no longer clouded by the injustices of the past.